So we're excited to have you today and to welcome you all to hear this amazing speaker, Rashmi Aaron. Today we feature a strong woman speaker who will share her unique and vulnerable story as she empowers us to be a leader in the face of adversity and challenges. With that, it is my honor to introduce our speaker today, Rashmi Aaron.
Hello. Thank you so much to Hollister, to Nada and Emily and Ashley and Mary and the whole team for having me. It is a little frigid. My Miami blood is not used to this Chicago weather. But I'm super thrilled to be here and couldn't be more excited when Nada reached out to me many months ago, actually. We've been talking for like 2 years, so I'm so excited to finally be here. So before I start, I do want to say that this is a very personal story, like Nada said. And I am going to take you all to a place that might be a little uncomfortable. So just allow yourselves to go there, okay? So I want to start with a story about my grandfather. So my grandfather was a freedom fighter with Gandhi. His name was Banarsi Das Saraf. In Hindi, we say Dadaji for your father's father. So my Dadaji fought against the British during the Quit India movement. As it turns out, on the day that my father was born, my Dadaji was sitting in a jail cell with Gandhi. So as you can imagine, I grew up with stories about my grandfather. And the stories that I would hear would be that he's a tenacious, surviving fighter, right? Like he would get out of jail, go home and eat with his 12 kids, go back out and fight the British. And nobody knew back then, just like in any revolution, if India was going to gain independence, right? But he knew that he was fighting for what he believed was the right thing to do. So later on, when India did gain independence, at the age of 12, my father had just finished reading Gandhi's autobiography, which is what they used to call it. Now they call them memoirs. And in Gandhi's autobiography, Gandhi shares this very embarrassing moment, like this humiliating incident from his life. So on this particular day, my father comes from this tiny little village in India. There's no paved roads, and he's riding on his bike with his father sitting on a carriage connected to the bike. By this time, my grandfather had gotten very ill because the conditions in the jail cells were so bad. So they're riding along on these dirt roads. They end up at this nearby pond, and they get off the bike, and they pick fruit from the nearby trees, and they're sitting and they're talking, and my father says to my grandfather, "I don't understand. Why would Gandhi share this very embarrassing moment in his life in his memoir that is now documented for the entire world to read about? I don't get it." And my grandfather says, "Because that's the point, son. When you go through life's hard lessons, you have a responsibility to share it so that others can learn and never go through that same mistake or bad judgment again." I believe I'm living that legacy, and I want to share my story. I went to UNC undergrad, then Columbia Law School, and then I was at Morgan Stanley for a period. And so by all accounts, I was a leader, right? I kind of had done the successful path. But I thought I had it all figured out, and I didn't. I was on this fast race course of life where many of you probably are, right? Like we get stuck because we want to achieve a goal, we want to get to the next promotion, we want to get our client, and so we start going out around the race course of life, kind of like this hamster, right? But what happens is when you're going around the race course of life, oftentimes that's when the bad judgment settles in. And that's how I landed in a federal prison. Yep. Handcuffs, shackles, waist chain, all of it. And I know I don't fit the mold, right? I don't look like a felon, but I am. So I want to share what happened. I started a real estate practice back in 2004. I had my own little company. I had 6 people that worked for me. At the time, my kids were 2 and 3, and my husband was a firefighter, right? So I was a major breadwinner, and I was pounding the pavement. I was trying to get business. I was trying to grow my business. And in 2007, I get this opportunity to meet a real estate developer. So take yourselves back to 2007 and 2008, right in the heyday of real estate before the crash. I live in South Florida. Like, it was booming in South Florida. And I think to myself, if I can get a real estate developer as a client, that would mean more volume business, which leads to financial stability, which leads to more time with my kids. So I was so focused on trying to get the client that I didn't end up doing any due diligence. So this is what happened. I walk in to his office in Miami Beach. Actually, the developer himself sat in a side office. He didn't even come in to meet with me. His two right-hand guys came into the conference room, and they started to describe these transactions that they had been doing. They had been working with a big law firm. They said, well, we'd like to leave this big law firm and work with you. First red flag, right? I should have asked some questions like, why would you leave a big law firm to work with me? They have more capacity, more experience, more breadth, more people. But that's not what happened in my head. What I was thinking was, I'm super flattered. There's something special about me, right? And remember, I wanted this client. So I convinced myself that I'm going to do anything I can to get this client. So he began to describe the transactions that they had already been doing, that they now wanted to start doing with me. So what they were doing is they would say, Nada, if you buy my condo unit, I will give you 2 years of a rental guarantee. We'll document it. It'll all be papered up. I'm thinking, okay, that's kind of creative, but okay. Within 2 weeks, I had my first closing request. I never took the time, nor did I make the time to do any questioning, to do any due diligence. And I remember when he brought this up, I left that conference room and I went into a side office and I called my underwriting counsel. And I described the scenario. I said, I'm with the developer. He's doing third-party disbursements on the settlement statement, which is what they were. Because I thought all that matters is my ins and outs from my escrow account. Now, I left out some really important information, which is the buyer was getting this benefit. But see, at the time, I didn't realize I was doing that. Or if I did, it was sort of subconscious because I wanted the client. So a steamroll came in, and I never stopped. I did about 200 closings for this client, 100 in Palm Beach and 100 in Tampa. And then I stopped doing transactional work altogether. I merged my practice with my father's, who's also an attorney, and we're doing litigation work. And I'm not even thinking about this client anymore. 2 more years go by. So it's 4 years after I meet the developer. The FBI knocks on my door. 2 agents. How many of you have ever had interaction with the FBI? Oh, one of you. Okay. I definitely have not. And the thing is when you're in law school, nobody tells you that you shouldn't talk to the FBI if they come to your door. And they know that. They also know that they can intimidate us and operate off fear. So human nature takes over, and I'm thinking to myself, if I don't talk to the FBI, they're definitely going to think I did something wrong. And hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to be an open book. Right? So 2 agents walk into my office, and I used to have my desk, and I had a little circular table. So we sat at my circular table, and for 4 hours, they grilled me. I didn't have an attorney there. Pretty dumb. They showed me pictures and documents and emails, and I'm answering every single question from things that happened 4 years earlier, yes, no, as if I could have that kind of memory. None of us have that, right? To be honest, I didn't understand the reach of the federal government. And I honestly didn't think I had done anything wrong. So I was just answering these questions. I'm they're not after me. If anybody did anything wrong, it must be the seller, the buyers, the brokers, the realtors, but not me. My files have passed audit. My files are clean. I'm good. 2 more years go by. Now it's June 2013, 6 years after I meet this developer. 4 years after I stop working with him. And I get a grand jury subpoena for documents. I'm still operating like I haven't done anything wrong. I'm the records custodian. They just want my documents, right? So I submit all my documents to the attorney. They wanted all my closing files with this one client. All right. I download them into a CD, and I submit them. Now, at that point in time, I finally decide to hire an attorney, which is he was a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, happens to be like a father figure of mine, Kendall Coffey. And I called Kendall, and he freaked out first and said, "Why did you talk to them without me?" Within 3 months, he called me into his office, and he said, "You're a target." Again, do any of you know what that means? The attorney in the room. I had no idea. Like, that's how oblivious I was to criminal law. Until he explained it to me, and he said, "You're a target, like they are coming after you." And I remember when he explained it to me, I literally collapsed on the ground and started crying. Because this was my whole life, right? This was everything I had worked so hard for. And all I could think about was, I'm disgracing my parents and my children and my family and my community. I sit on a lot of boards in Miami, and I'm thinking, oh my God, all these nonprofits that I've done all of this nonprofit work for, now are going to be affected by bad decisions. So for a long time, I kept trying to avoid prosecution. Like, the prosecutor, whose name was Joe Capone, would call my attorney and say, "Rashmi still has time. We just want to talk to her." And my response was, "I don't know anything." Like, on principle, what am I going to say? I really don't know anything. So in April 2014, I was indicted for 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud and 24 counts of bank fraud. They took 24 transactions, attached it to the complaint, and that became my indictment. I printed out 200,000 pages of documents and 15,000 emails, and I would take my kids to school or camp, and I would pour into these documents. This was all I did every single day for months, because I was so convinced that I'm going to prove my innocence. Right? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm going to find that one smoking gun piece of evidence that's going to exonerate me. And every few weeks, now by this point I had hired another attorney to be my trial attorney, who's a dear friend, because Kendall, who's very well known in South Florida, said, "You're going to need me as a character witness." So I hired David, who's the best there is in South Florida, to be my trial attorney. And I've known him 20 years. Like, our kids are in plays together. He lives a mile from me. I taught at UM Law School with him. Like, I've known him a long time. He was like, "We're going to fight this thing." So every few weeks, we would go in and we would go over the documents that we had looked over, and we'd separate them out. We'd be like, "Okay, here are the good pieces of documents. Here are the not-so-good pieces of documents." 4 months later, in August of 2014, David said, "Hey, can you come in with your parents? We'd like to have a meeting with you." So Mom, Dad, and I walk in. David and his partner Margot sit in their little conference room, and we walk in expecting to talk about trial, which was set for December. Okay, we're going to walk in and we're going to talk about strategy, exhibits, expert witnesses, my testimony, all the stuff you would talk about for a trial. Instead, Margot put up this entire presentation. David was sitting right next to me. Margot said, "Okay, Rashmi, if you go to trial, this is what the government has to prove. And here are all the evidence that the government's going to use to prove their case. Then we're going to go up and put up our defense. And here's all the evidence we're going to use to prove our case. And then the government's going to put up their rebuttal. And this is the evidence they're going to use." And David looks at me and says, "Rashmi, I've known you for a really long time. I know you didn't walk into this to plan a crime. But here's the deal. I'm telling you right now, if you go to trial, you're going to lose. And you're looking at 20 years in prison. Like, you're going to miss all of it. You're going to miss your kids' high school graduation, college graduation, marriage, kids, you're going to miss all of it. And I know you think you didn't do anything wrong, but you did. If you go to trial, a jury is going to get a whole host of jury instructions, but let's talk about two of them. The first, conspiracy. The conspiracy jury instruction says, okay, these are not legal terms, these are my words. If the defendant knew even one detail, over here, out of 500 million other ones, you, the jury, have to convict her. And he looks at me and he's like, Rashmi, your name is on every settlement statement, every check, every email, every document. Do you really think that a jury is going to think you didn't know even one detail? And the truth is you did know, right? You knew that there was this rental guarantee. You knew there was this buyer incentive. And we're going to talk about the second jury instruction in a little bit. I can tell you in that meeting that my dad walked out of that room 6 times to go to the bathroom. And every time he'd come back with his eyes just a little redder. He's the crier in my family. My mom is like hard as nails. And I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do up to that point in my life, which was I decided to plead guilty. And I took off this fighting hat and I put on ownership. And I had to understand that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be a convicted felon. And everything that comes along with it. Like, some of you out there might be passing judgment on me. And it is what it is. I got to deal with that for the rest of my life. A couple months later, I had my plea hearing. And I walked into that hearing, and the judge sits all the way back there. And he said, do you understand you're giving up your right to vote? Like, I can never vote again? I have voted in every election since I turned 18. Yes, sir. Do you understand you can never serve on a jury again? I can never have the privilege to serve on a jury again? My attorney literally had to put his hand up on my back just to hold me up because I was about to collapse. But I knew that I had to be honest. Because if the judge didn't think I was being honest, he wasn't going to accept my plea, and I was looking at 20 years. So I had to be truthful in my ownership. Ultimately, in June 2015, I was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. And 60 days later, I surrendered. So I want to share a little bit more about the lessons that I've learned, because having a government-imposed time off, like a timeout, really wakes you up, right? And over time, I've realized there's a lot to learn from what happened in my life, the bad decisions that I made. And I started doing all this research to understand, how did I go so off path? I was like the perfect girl. Like, I'm 52, to this day, I've never tried a cigarette. I am that nerd, right? So I came up with this concept of dharma leadership. So dharma in Hindi means the duty to yourself and to others. And it's all really about self-awareness. And I think each one of us, we all are leaders, right? It's all about personal leadership. And having the intentional awareness at work, at home, in our communities, every place we show up, in every moment. So I'm going to talk through each principle, and I don't have all the time today to go through like a lot of detail, right? I do a lot of training and workshops to do some deep dives with smaller groups, but I really want to touch on the 6 principles. So the first is decision making. Having the mental discipline for a decision-making process is not rocket science, but it is so important. And I can tell you that when I was making all these decisions, I was just making decisions, right? Like, we're trying to get to the next goal. I'm trying to get to my daughter's volleyball game. Like, I just want to make decisions because they're convenient or hasty. And oftentimes when we do that, we make bad decisions. Okay, so this is just a 4-step process that I came up with. I was lucky enough to do a TEDx talk a few years ago, And back then it was 5 steps, so I've now drilled it down to 4. All right, so the first step is pause. So, like I said, we are on this race course of life. And we want to go around it so fast because we don't want that other person over there to get our promotion, or to get the client, or to get the sale, or to get the job, or to get the boyfriend or girlfriend or husband, whatever, right? Like, first of all, spiritually, I believe that whatever's meant for me, nobody can take from me. That's the first principle. But the second is, if we're so trying to go around our race course so fast that we don't take a moment to pause, that's when the bad decisions happen. Maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, but ultimately, eventually, something will happen. So I'm not saying pause for like an hour, a day, a week, but just take a moment to pause. Get off the race course for a second, for a moment. Because once you pause, then you can listen. And what are you listening for? You're listening for your inner voice. Now, we all call it different things, right? Your moral compass, energy, God, whatever you want to call it, your gut. But we all have this inner voice that is constantly talking to us and guiding us. But if you're like me, I got really good at ignoring my inner voice and shutting it down. I didn't want to hear what my inner voice had to say because I wanted to keep the client. Right? So I want to share a story. It's Christmas Eve, 2007. 2 months after I meet the developer, I am deep in it, right? Like, we are doing closings. I am crazy stressed. And it happens to be that Christmas, that holiday season, my entire family decides to descend into Miami for like a family reunion. So my aunties, my uncles, my cousins, my sister and her husband and kids, everybody now is in Miami. It's Christmas Eve, 8 o'clock. Christmas music is playing. We always make Christmas cookies so you can smell the Christmas cookies, and the Christmas tree you can smell, right? It's kind of chaotic. My kids are 2 and 3, and they used to share a bedroom. So now I'm in the bedroom trying to make them sleep. The whole family's outside in the living room, and I'm in the kids' bedroom making them sleep. So my daughter's in her crib, my son's in his toddler bed, and I'm sitting in the middle on a glider. I don't know if you guys have gliders. Remember gliders? So I'm sitting on the glider, and I'm singing my children to sleep because that's what I used to do. आजकल मैं डर गया दिन हुआ तमाम. This was a lullaby that my parents used to sing to me. So it's like nostalgic for me. I mean, even now, when I come home or if I lay my head onto my mom's lap, my mom starts to sing this song. So this is what I used to sing to my children every evening, As I'm singing them to sleep, I look down at my BlackBerry. You guys remember those? Yeah. So I'm looking at my BlackBerry, and an email pops in. And the email is from a realtor about a closing that's supposed to happen right after the holidays. I open the email, and there's one line that reads, buyer to receive $70,000 from rental guarantee, and there's a document attached. So I don't know what your first reaction would be to that, but I had like a sucker punch gut. Like, $70,000? That's a lot of money for this buyer to be getting back. But there's a document attached that I know I've reviewed a rental guarantee document. And we had parameters set forth like I had talked to the client about. I forward the email within like 5 seconds to the woman that works for me, my closing coordinator. This is all while I'm singing to my children. So the first question is does anybody expect me to respond to this email on Christmas Eve at 8 o'clock? Nobody does. But I'm a solo practitioner. I'm a young woman business owner. I have to set myself apart from every other attorney. By the way, there's like 500 other attorneys in Miami doing exactly what I was doing. So how am I going to set myself apart? By customer service, by response time, by follow-up. This is how I prided myself. So I forward the email, expecting that if there was anything different in the document that my closing coordinator, my employee, would let me know. But otherwise, I'm sure everything's fine. Right? I don't even open the attachment. Now, why did I forward this email so quickly without like any sense of attention to the document or anything? Well, I have a house full of relatives. It's almost Christmas morning. My kids are not yet sleeping, and none of my presents are wrapped. Have any of you ever forwarded an email without actually paying attention to all the details that you should? Or maybe trusting that somebody else will do it and then let you know? What if I told you that that one email was the rebuttal piece of evidence that my attorney showed me in that plea meeting? Like, had I just not forwarded the email on Christmas Eve, maybe I would have actually opened the document, paid it more attention, and maybe not let it go through. But see, I didn't listen to my inner voice. So, pause. Listen to your inner voice. Reflect. So now, you've listened to your inner voice. You've heard what your inner voice is saying, but now you've got to reflect on it. So reflect means there's this line, okay? There's a line, and on one side of the line are the good and right decisions, and on the other side of the line are the bad and wrong decisions. We all know it's there, right? We all have that moral compass. Our parents have taught us, our coaches, our teachers. We know what's right and wrong. But on either side of the line, there's also a gray area. Okay, if you're on the right side of the line in the gray area, well, that's where you have strategic thinking, disruptive thinking, profitability. That's the good stuff, right? It's okay to be in the gray. But if you're on the wrong side of the line, that's the slippery slope. Because you make that first bad decision, and it seems like it goes okay. So then you make a second bad decision, and nothing has happened, so it's okay. Everybody else is doing it. Before you know it, you are stuck in a pattern, and you can't climb out of it. And you can justify it, you can rationalize it, right? My competitor is doing it, the other's attorneys are doing it. I just need to get it done just this one time. So you don't want to play in the gray on the wrong side of the line. Okay? Choose to play in the gray on the right side of the line. Pause, listen, reflect, and then decide. Right? Then make the best conscious decision that you can. Are you ready for the kicker? No matter the consequences. Because the thing is making the right decision is absolutely going to mean at some point in time you're going to lose something. And loss aversion is like a thing. None of us want to lose anything. We are not living to lose, are we? But sometimes you have to be willing to lose something to do the right thing. So you might lose the client, the customer, the job promotion, the job, a friend, a relationship, money. At some point, you are going to lose something. I promise you, it's better than ending up in prison like me. So, D for Dharma is decision making. The next is H, humility. So we all know humility is, right? Not living in arrogance, respecting others, not being boastful. But I want to talk about something different, which is moral humility. And I want to share a story. So right after I had gotten indicted, 2 weeks later, my parents are very involved in the Indian community in Miami. They were probably one of the first Indian families to settle in Miami back in the 70s, early 70s. So over time, we've had a lot of friends that have come into our community. And we have a very close-knit group of friends. I get indicted. And remember I told you that I have disgraced my parents. This is how I felt. I was so scared what all these aunties and uncles were going to think about me. Because I spent my whole life believing that my aunties and uncles in our community, and my family for that matter, loved me, believed in me because of my achievements. Because I got to go to an Ivy League law school, because I used to win the awards, because I got great grades, right? This is, especially in an immigrant mentality, this is what we believe about ourselves. We expect this from ourselves. So one particular evening, 2 weeks after I get indicted, we invite the entire Indian community, like our close friends, I should say. It's about 50 aunties and uncles, come, and I'm sitting on the couch in my parents' house, and my mom's on one side, and my dad is standing at the corner of the room, and over here is one of my uncles from the community. And my dad begins to tell everybody that I've just been indicted. He's crying. I can tell you that I actually believed that every one of those aunties and uncles would literally stand up and leave. This is what I thought was going to happen. And instead, this uncle sitting right here turned to me and said, "Beti," which in Hindi means daughter, "one day you will realize that this is not happening to you, it's happening for you." Right? I didn't get it at the time. I was so full of fear. But that was the day that I realized, oh my gosh, people love me for me, not for my achievements. And all those aunties and uncles came and hugged me. And on that day, I believe my parents taught this concept of moral humility. Moral humility is this idea that every one of us on any given day could make a bad moral decision, given the pressures, the competition, the influences around us. Because if you think that you're infallible, you're not. Right? My parents, I know, lived in this space for a long time until I went through this. And can you imagine, my parents standing in front of this room of their closest friends telling them that their daughter did this? It was so emotional, but yet so humbling and rewarding for my parents to show everybody this concept of moral humility. Right? Because we don't really think about this idea of moral humility. So next is this idea of overconfidence bias. I'm the oldest of 3 girls in my family. In the Indian community, not having a boy is like a thing, right? Hopefully we've grown out of it. But my dad used to say, I don't need a boy. I have 3 strong daughters. And my dad raised me to be as equal to a boy, if not better. And so somehow that meant I always had a lot of confidence, right? Leaders have confidence. We're taught we should have confidence. If you shake my hand, I shake your hand with a strong grip, and I look you straight in the eye. But there's a trap if you have too much confidence. It's called the overconfidence bias trap. And it goes like this. I'm a good person, therefore I make the right decisions. So I got stuck in this trap because I believe I'm a good person. I sit on boards, I give my time to my community, I'm a great mom and sister and friend and daughter. But when you believe you're such a good person that you could never make a bad decision, that's exactly when the bad decisions happen. Because when you have overconfidence bias, you lack any sense of moral awareness or moral judgment about what you're doing. And none of us are immune to this. Right? So I had to do a lot of research to get to the point where I got this concept, because nobody taught this to me, which is part of the reason I do this now for all of you, is so all of you can learn from these mistakes that I've made. So next is accountability. This is a much longer conversation that I don't have time for today, and I do a lot of deep dives on accountability, and especially with leaders. But what I want to talk a little bit about is that second jury instruction that I didn't get into, right? So the second jury instruction is this. You can't put your head in the sand. So David turns to me on that day and says, you can't pretend not to know. So the jury instruction is willful blindness, right? And it goes like this. Not doing something is still doing something wrong. I'm going to say it again. Not doing something is still doing something wrong. Have any of you just stood mute in the face of something questionable? Have you just turned a blind eye because you just don't want to say anything? You don't want to see it? Have you yourself known that a friend was cheating on their spouse? Taking a pack of gum? Right? We've all been in this scenario. We've all had this happen to us in our own lives in a personal level. Right? At a grander level, for me, I had to recognize that I knew enough and I didn't want to know more because I knew that that would mean I would walk away from this client. And that was one of the biggest things I had to learn in this. Willful blindness is a thing. So once I decided to take accountability, I had to forgive myself. Right? I hold myself up to some very high expectations, aside from my cultural expectations and family expectations. I personally hold myself to very high expectations. And here I am now pleading guilty to a federal crime. This process of forgiveness for me was a long, arduous process. Like, literally, I would go on long walks, I would pray, I'd drink some wine, I would cry, I would exercise everything I could to get to the point where I could look at myself in the mirror, literally, not being figurative about it, until I looked at myself in the mirror and said, I forgive you. And then once I forgave myself, I had to forgive my client, who, by the way, never got indicted. And then I had to forgive everybody else that was in this case with me. Because what was it bringing me? A stomach ulcer? Negative energy? And at that point, I've already been indicted. Nothing that happens to anybody else is going to change what's happened to me. Right? We forgive others for ourselves, not for them. So accountability means you forgive yourself. We are not meant to be perfect humans. Life is meant to learn lessons. Some of us learn harder lessons than others. None of you, I hope, end up where I was, right? But we all go through something. So after forgiveness I want to talk about my allocution. An allocution is the defendant's ability to go in at their sentencing hearing and apologize. Right? So Rashmi means the rays of the morning sun. Sunrises are spiritual for me. And I used to be an avid runner. Now I'm an avid walker. But on that particular day in 2014, when I was writing, actually it was 2015, when I was writing my allocution, I remember I wanted to go to my happy place, which in Miami is Matheson Hammock Park, at sunrise, run a few miles, and sit and write my allocution. Truly be at peace with myself spiritually and apologize. And I wrote out my allocution and took true ownership. So how many of you have been in a federal courtroom? The lawyers in the room, okay? So federal courtrooms are very long rooms, right? The judge sits at the back, kind of uprisen on a podium a little bit. If there was a jury, there'd be the jury box. There's the prosecution side and the defense side, and then the galley. So after I pled guilty at my hearing in December 2014, it was really important to me that nobody read about it or heard about it from anybody else. And the truth is I didn't know if the U.S. Attorney's Office was going to issue a press release, right? But it was really important to me that nobody gossiped about it. So I, because I'm a very anal person, made a spreadsheet of all the people in my life, from kindergarten, all the way up to present day. People that knew my character and my history and my stories. And one by one, I picked up the phone and started calling people. This is right after the holidays, 2015, before I got sentenced. And on every call, I would tell the entire story, like I just told you guys. And I would cry, and there'd be shock on the other end of the phone, right? Because people couldn't believe that Rashmi, the perfect girl, had been indicted and that I had pled guilty. And on every call, I asked for help. So let me tell you the biggest lesson I got from this, from taking accountability. People are very forgiving of our humanity. I was so sure that just like that meeting with all the Indian aunties and uncles, that as I called people, which was about 200 people, I would get hung up on. People would shun me. People would not want to be friends with me. And instead, on every call, every person showed me love, agreed to write a letter to the judge for me. So on the day of my sentencing hearing, the judge had a binder of letters, 200 of them almost, this thick. I keep a copy of it, actually, on my nightstand. It's like I got eulogized before I died. Like, what a gift, right? People shared stories about how I had touched their lives, like when I was a teenager, and I didn't even know I had touched their lives in such a powerful way, right? They spoke to my history and my character. So on that day, in the back, all those pews were packed full. People drove, like my roommate from college flew down from New York and didn't even tell me she was going to. One of my best friends drove overnight from Charlotte to be there. Like, this is the true testament to who we are when people show up for us in life, in the worst of times, right? And on that day is when I got sentenced to 1 year and a day. And I was scared, right? Scared. Now, I wasn't scared for me, because I'm a survivor. Like, I can handle anything. Who was I scared for? My kids. Yep. What's going to happen to my 9 and 10-year-old when I'm in prison? Because this is the real stuff, right? Like, it's not about how much money am I going to make. It's not about that. It's what's going to happen to my kids. Okay, I lose my bar license. But what's going to happen to my kids? So, after accountability, my relationships showed up for me. You know who took care of my kids? My village. My relationships. Yes, of course, my family, their dad, my besties, right? Some of them are in this picture. But because I had been so open, their teachers knew about it, their friends, parents knew about it. All these people wrote letters of support for me. So they didn't have to suffer in silence. They were surrounded by love. And here's the thing about relationships, right? If you walk into a relationship from an authentic, selfless, genuine place, not because you want something, not because you hope to get a promotion or a job, but you really just want to learn something. Because Susan, I think you're so fabulous and I really want to understand your journey, right? You learn from somebody. You approach somebody because you want to learn from them, not because you want something from them. And by the way, a relationship means there's a give and take, right? You're also going to give back. So I do a lot of work on campuses. So I work with law students and business school students and university students. And I tell students, seek out mentors. And mentors are not always only those people in your chosen profession, right? Mentors are anybody who you think, younger or older, can guide you in some way, can help you learn something, teach you a new way or perspective of seeing something, right? There's a whole new way of seeing life sometimes just by knowing somebody. So investing in relationships matters. We all know people do business with who they like, right? But it's beyond that, right? At my hearing, when that galley was full of people, there were people sitting there that I had met 20 years, 30 years earlier that were instrumental in my hearing. I'm a big believer in divine connections. And it wasn't an accident that I met them 20 years earlier. How could I have known 20 years later I would maybe need their help to help maybe guide a judge in one way or the other? And I think in business, whether you have a board, whether you're privately owned, whether you're a public entity, you have all your teams and leaders, it's all about the relationships that we build, because we can continually learn from each other and grow. But it takes vulnerability. It takes truly opening up. And a lot of the work I do when I do workshops is getting people to open up and be vulnerable, where we dig deep. Because when you really get to know somebody, you're vested. So create relationships in your communities, at work. Invest in those relationships. Take time to have partners. Talk through the tough stuff. Because having those courageous conversations is really hard, but I can promise you that you never know where these relationships are going to take you, right? Next is mindset. M in Dharma. Mindset is something we all talk about, right? And for me, mindset is encompassed in a lot of different ways, okay? Yes, I want you to have a positive mindset, which is think positive. So I had to spend 10 days in a 12-story building when I first surrendered in August 2015. And then after 10 days, I was told I'm being transported. Now, when you're in the system, right, the day you surrender is obviously the worst because you're full of fear, right, and the uncertainty and the unknowing. After that, the day of transport, dealing with the U.S. Marshals, are absolutely the worst because you're a number. You're not a human being, you're a number, okay? So on this particular day, I'm being transported from Miami to, it's called the Federal Detention Center, FDC, to Coleman, which is an hour north of Orlando. And I had heard all these stories about transport, right? But literally, like at midnight, they call you down and they strip you of whatever prison garb they've already given you. They put paper clothing on you. Again, the handcuffs and the shackles and the waist chain. And they pile us onto a bus. There were about 20 of us being transported that day. And we pile on to this bus. There's all sorts of other parts of the story that I won't share. But suffice it to say, it's an hour from where I'm about to get to Coleman. And for 10 days, I had not seen the sun rise. I hadn't seen the sun at all. I hadn't breathed fresh air because I was in a building with no fresh air. So now I'm on a bus in handcuffs and shackles. No, I didn't have shackles for a specific reason. I had handcuffs. And the sun begins to rise on the east. I haven't seen the sun in 10 days. And remember, sunrises are spiritual to me. And as the sun begins to rise, I think to myself, how lucky am I? This sense of positive gratitude, which is crazy bizarre because I'm in handcuffs on a bus going to a federal camp. But the point is it's all about mindset, right? It's all about, in any moment, we can find a way to be grateful, to find the good and the positive in anything, because we all will go through these moments. And it's about finding those positive moments. So mindset means find the positive, but it also means focus on your mental wellness. As a company, I know that Hollister does focus on mental wellness, right? I saw the wellness room, there's an inspiration room. Mental wellness is so important because each of us on any given day, we are fighting our own battles at home. We all have our own stories, right? I tell leaders that you really have to focus on this mental wellness stuff. And I know firsthand, my sister passed away 4 years ago from a mental health incident. So it is very real to me. And if we don't focus on our own mental health, whether you work out, right? Those that I got to eat with last night and this morning know I work out every single day, no matter where I am, no matter how much sleep or lack of sleep I've had, no matter how tired I am, I find a way to move my body because I believe movement is medicine. So, exercise, meditation, there's a lot of M's here, right? Yoga, some sort of self-care, and sleep. Super important, sleep. I'm not telling you guys something you don't know already, but just adding it in there. So mindset is imperative to being personal leaders. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves and our mindset on how we're looking at things, we're not able to be aware of what's going on around us, of the decisions that we're making, of how we're being leaders, right? And last is awareness. So I'm only going to touch on awareness because I do this whole 360 survey and we dive deep into awareness, which is this is my whole mission now, is intentional awareness. Because if we're not intentionally aware of who we are, we can't be good leaders. So what are your core values? Are you aware of what your core values are? Are you aware of how you're making those decisions? Are you aware of how people impact you and how you impact others? The words that you use, the gestures that you make.
Ultimately, Dharma leadership principles lead to an intentional awareness for all of us to truly have a sense of self. And only when we understand these 6 principles can we make better decisions, create vulnerability, and truly contribute to our organizational cultures. These principles combined lead us to a sense of self, and that self-intelligence and awareness I call your Dharma intelligence, your DQ. If we had a little bit more time, I would go through the DQ, but definitely we'll follow up with some workshops.
Right? So we'll dive deeper, hopefully, at some other point. But I want to, before I end with my last story, I want to ask all of you to please take out your phones. Have you guys gotten something out of today? Yes? Has it been helpful? Was the story impactful, memorable? Hopefully you will never forget my story. If each of you could take out your phones, I'm always trying to get better at what I'm doing. I have a lot to learn. So if you have your phone, you don't have your phone. Okay, well, those of you that have your phone, please, I would love feedback. So if you just scan this QR code, type in the word Dharma, and it's like a 2 or 3 minute, really quick survey. And just please be honest with me about how you feel about the presentation. And I'm going to stay quiet for just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to end with the story. And those of you, by the way, that are live streaming, please do this for me as well. You can do the QR code, and there's at the bottom there is the URL you can type in. It's talk.ac/rushme. So those of you that are live streaming, if you could do it, I'd love your input as well. I know it's not the same if you're not live. And yeah, my LinkedIn and my Instagram are there. You can follow me. All right, is everyone done? Almost done? Okay, so once you're done, I'd like everybody to stand up. And if you're live streaming, stand up at your desk. Okay, some of you, I can see, probably already know how to do this, so no judgment, okay? So I'm going to tell a story, and then we're going to go to the next slide. So I had to spend 23 days in a county jail, and there's a story behind that. But I was asked to testify in another case while I was already incarcerated. And sorry, you guys are going to have to stand for a bit, but a couple minutes. So I get transported, another horrible transport day, and I get sent to county jail in Pasco County. And the difference between federal and county is pretty significant, right? So when you're in the federal system, if you get punished, like if you get in trouble for something, if you get into a fight, your punishment is you get sent to county, right? So I am now voluntarily going to county. Why? Because I'm being asked to testify in another case. And the reason I'm doing this is I have been told and promised that if and when I do testify in this other case, my prosecutor will file what's called a Rule 35 motion, which is a motion for me to come home early. Skips house arrest, halfway house, I get to come home. So that's a huge incentive for me. So I go to county jail voluntarily, and I had heard horror stories about county jail. right? The demographics. And all of it was true. They would wake us up at 3 in the morning for breakfast. Then we'd have to clean. Then we'd have to clean some more, right? Then maybe we'd have some private time, personal time. So I would read, try to move a little bit, work out. And then we'd have lunch at like 9. Makes a lot of sense, right? Lunch at 9. So before I go to county jail, I had all these ideas in my head. Like, oh my God, the guards are going to be full of power and super horrible, which they were. But I also had a preconceived notion about the women I was going to be in prison with, right? Now I get to prison, and the woman above me was a prostitute heroin dealer. The woman next to me was a homeless person who had been selling drugs. And the woman above her was a 24-year-old meth dealer with a 4-year-old at home whose two sisters were in other housing units for the same thing. I never before would have ever likely interacted with these individuals. And I absolutely would have passed judgment on them in my former life. I would have thought I'm better than them. But now, here I am for 23 days, eating with them, laughing with them, crying with them, praying with them, trying to get them to work out with me. And I realized, but for the grace of God, there go I. In any given day, I could be in their shoes. I just happened to be born into this life, to these parents. Yeah? So one evening, we're watching TV. So the way we would watch TV is there were all these like bunks on the edge, on the wall, bunk cubes with the bunk beds. In the center area were like tables where we would eat that were all nailed to the ground. And beyond that was this tiny little sliver of a space where there was a TV attached to the wall in the corner, and there were rows of metal chairs attached to the ground. So we're sitting on these metal chairs, and we're watching TV, and Burlesque comes on. And have you guys seen Burlesque? Christina Aguilar, Cher. Awesome movie. A lot of dancing and music. We're in county jail. And the movie comes on, and it's all about dancing. So the movie ends, we go back to our cube, the 4 of us, and we're like in dancing mode, right? Like you try to find joy, right? So one of the girls says to me, hey, do you know how to Bollywood dance? I'm like, that's like a loaded question because all Indians do some level of dancing when we go to weddings. Like I live for weddings. Am I right? Right? Yes, we live for Indian weddings, so we can dance at weddings. And I am the first person on the dance floor. So there we are in county jail, and one of the girls starts singing this song. And we found joy in the hardest of moments. And I know you guys have all heard this song. Ready? You turn the volume up. Have you guys heard this song? All right. So she starts singing this, and they said, will you teach us a Bollywood dance move? So I'm going to teach you guys, no judgment, please. I'm going to teach you guys a Bollywood dance move. Ready? Everyone put your hands up. Right? So first you're going to just rock your shoulders, hips and shoulders. I want to see the hips and the shoulders. Okay, now open and close the light bulb. All right, now just dance with your partner. So there I am in county jail, and this is what I'm doing, okay? That's it. Thank you guys so much. All right, so we're going to open it up to Q&A. We have like 25 minutes. So first of all, thank you so much for indulging me and learning how to do some Bollywood dancing. And those of you that already know how to Bollywood dance, thank you for not passing judgment. So I'd love to take questions. And remember, there's no question off the table. So ask me anything you want about prison, about my life, about the kids, anything. Yes?
Why do you think they picked you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is why do I think they picked me? So they, meaning the prosecutor?
No, the prosecutor, the person that
The client.
to do business.
Oh, the client. So it's a longer story, but essentially, prior to me starting my own practice, I worked for the government. I was a government attorney, a county attorney. And there was a woman that I knew from those days that was, she represented bail bondsmen and also did some criminal defense work. So now fast forward, I've left the county attorney's office. I've started my own practice. And I run into her at a restaurant on a Friday. that following Monday, and she was like, oh, what are you doing? I said, oh, I started my own real estate practice. I give her my card. If you ever need a closing, please reach out to me. That following Monday, she calls me and says, hey, do you want to work with a real estate developer? So as it turns out, they had this whole scheme already planned. And yes, I do believe that because I was a hungry, young attorney wanting business, wanting that big client, and she could see right through that. By the way, she's one of the people I had to forgive because she never got indicted. She got a kickback from me and from the client, me legally, right? A lawyer can refer a lawyer and give legal fees, but that client used to give her a kickback. She made 10 times more than I did on these transactions. But here's the thing, when the FBI went to her, she knew better. So when the FBI went to her, she said, I'll call you back with my attorney. And I've now since learned this because I was sharing last night with some folks that I now sometimes speak on stages with my prosecutor. He has since retired, and we've become very good friends, which is totally bizarre, but amazing. And I love this guy. His name's Joe. He's a really phenomenal guy. So Joe, I mean, I hated him at the beginning, to be fair, but he's a really stellar, just great guy. But Joe has told me that when she walked in, she said, I'll give you all the facts, I'll give you all my files, but I want qualified and protected immunity. Now, by the way, her factual scenario is not what happened, but that's what the government went with. It was a version of the facts that was her version to make her look good and make me look really bad. And when I signed my factual proffer, I had to sign that factual proffer as if that's what happened because I didn't have a choice. Like it wasn't worth the fight at that point. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I was a sucker in that. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Yes?
Do you think the email that was on Christmas Eve was planted? Like a purposeful? Or was it just coincidental?
Honestly, so the question is do I think that Christmas Eve email was planted? I honestly don't think so. I just think it was there, and I just didn't give it the credit it was due and attention it was due. I mean, that's the point, right? Like, these things can happen on any given day. We just have to pay attention. I'm going to go here first. No. I'll repeat it. Go ahead and just say it, and I'll repeat it.
I talk kind of low, so can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. Having gone through what you've gone through and the whole, path to get regret now, would you have changed anything from the past or made different decisions? If yes, why? If no,
Yes.
why? If maybe, why?
So I get this question a lot. What are your inflection points? So I would say my first inflection point is the day that I met the developer. When I went into his office and he said, we want to leave this big law firm and come and work with you, I wish I would have asked why, right? So that's the first. I also wish that when I had that call with underwriting counsel, that I would have given them all of the facts, not just the facts that I thought mattered, right? Of course, another inflection point is the day, the Christmas Eve email, right? There's tons of them along the way. The day the FBI came, had I just thought about it, right? And I told somebody about it before I went and talked to them. Or even right after, 2 days later, or next day, call and say, hey, you know what, can I come in with my attorney and have a conversation with you? I want to revisit some of the stuff I just said. Like I said, I didn't understand the reach of the government. I didn't understand that they can literally get all of your servers and all of your emails from years and years and years and years from everybody and anybody. So that's another inflection point. Yeah, so I mean, so we talked about this last night at dinner, if I could go back, I wish I would have made better decisions, right, and been a better attorney. But I don't think I would take away the prison experience because I would say that I was a really good person before, but I am a much better person today, having gone through what I went through. And so are my kids, right? I don't wish this on anybody, right? It was very hard, and I've lost my bar license, I lost all my money. It was really hard. And it's still hard, honestly. And people want to pass judgment on me, right? It still happens. But I feel like now my metric of how I measure myself is, have I touched your lives today? Not how much money am I making today, right? So for me, I wouldn't change that. Yes.
Do you feel like your experience in prison or being prosecuted was better or worse because of your professional background?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So I do think that, so I know that there's a lot of privilege that I have when I went through this criminal process. One, because I could hire the best attorney. And even though he was a friend, he gave me a massive discount than what he normally charges, right? But even that's not available to other people. So I recognize the privilege in that. And then, of course, in my education. What I understand is that the sentencing for me as an attorney was harder than it would have been for other people. Because I know that we are, as attorneys, expected to know more, do more, be better. And we have that fiduciary duty. So, yes.
Since your children were so young when everything happened, how did you approach the conversation with them, and how did you maintain your relationship with them while you were in prison?
Yeah, so the question is, for those that are live streamed, how did I approach my children with the truth, and then how did I maintain the relationship and keep it? So both their dad and I were very clear that we wanted to be honest with our kids. We just understood from a spiritual perspective, frankly, that this was also their journey, their karma. My mom said, this is also their karma. So I would say it was like 3 weeks after I got sentenced. We sat them both down, so it was like Eric is my ex-husband's name, Eric, and my son, Kyler, Maya next to me and me. And they both are athletes, and so at the time, Kyler was playing football, flag, and my daughter was playing soccer. So we gave them sports analogies. So we said, Kyler, if you're on the football field and you're in a huddle and the coach says, go run a 7 and out, because he was, I don't remember, safety, I guess, and you aren't paying attention and somehow you run a 4 and out, right? The coach is going to get super mad at you, and he might sit you out for a set of downs or punish you in some other way. Maya, if you're in, you get a yellow card or something on the soccer field, you might get taken out for a few minutes. Well, in real life, there are real life consequences. And mommy has made some bad decisions, and mommy has to go away for a year. Because at the time, I thought it was going to be a year. And actually, I remember on that day, Maya, because school had already finished, it was June, so we were in the summer. And Maya, she was dying. She jumped into my lap and started hugging me, and she was super upset. And the good thing that happened was I was given 60 days to surrender, and I was allowed to travel. So I get brought to tears a lot too. So I was allowed to travel, and that summer I took them to Chapel Hill, to my alma mater, which they had never been to, and we went hiking in Asheville. And so it doesn't really matter where I was, honestly, but the ability to just be with them living life allowed them to ask me questions. So along the way, every now and then they'd say, Mommy, what are you going to eat? Mommy, can we come see you and visit you? Mommy, will you be safe? Because I think in general, kids want to know that their mom's going to be safe, and dad, yeah, right? And that I'm going to come home. So I believe that my telling my children the truth strengthened my relationship with them, and they are so much more resilient because of it now. So my son is now a freshman in college, and my daughter's a senior in high school. They both, in their own ways, alluded to it in their college applications about their individual approaches to what happened. My daughter started a nonprofit while I was in prison to help raise money and toys to give to children whose parents are in prison. And there's a whole story behind that. She's been doing it every year since 2015. She's been in the paper, in the news, and whatever. And every year now she raises money because what happened was she saw these kids when she would visit me, and she knew that she's very, my kids are very blessed. They're surrounded by family, and we have the resources, but a lot of kids don't. And so over Thanksgiving, she was visiting me, and she said, Mommy, are all those kids going to be able to get presents for Christmas? And I said, I don't know, honey, probably not. And so she went home and with my mom started this nonprofit that's called Gifts, Goods for Inmates' Families to Share. And so, both of them have had their own journey through this, and they very proudly share what happened to me with their friends. So all their friends know about it. I mean, their friends lived through this with them, right? Their parents knew about it, and we talk about it. They've all heard my speeches. They've all watched my TED Talk. So I have a really strong relationship with my children. I mean, just like any mom. I mean, I fight with my daughter like crazy, but we're very, very close. And when I was in prison, I'll tell you this. I would get up every morning, and the first thing I would do is I would go to where the computer terminals were, and I would send an email to my children, because there was an hour delay from when you sent the email from prison to when they would get it. And there's a system in which you send emails. It's not like regular email, because there's no internet access. So that's the first thing I would do every morning, is I would send an email to my children. Then every night, I would, I think I always had a quote generally I had a quote. But then every night I would call. So when you're in prison, this is how it used to be. I have no idea. It's been 7 years since I was in. But you're only allowed 300 minutes a month, which sounds like a lot, right? I'm saying only. But if you break that out, it's only 10 minutes a day. So I literally would I bought a watch from commissary, and I would literally look at my watch as I would start the phone call, which is a payphone call. You have to pay for the phone. You have to pay for the call, right? You have to buy minutes to pay for the call. And I would look at my phone, and I would do like a minute with my parents, 4.5 minutes with Kyler, 4.5 minutes with Maya, and it was very and then at some point we started to have the ability to do video calls from there, and you could do one video call a week that were 21 minutes. So I would also schedule then one video call a week. So I got to actually see their faces when they weren't visiting me for the weekend. So they would visit me every 3 weekends. They would visit. But I have a very strong relationship with my children. Yeah, I'm really blessed.
I think we have a couple online.
Okay.
The first one is, you said you weren't shackled at first when you were being transported for a particular reason.
Oh gosh. Okay, I shared this last night. But so I was asked, so that when I got transported from Miami to Coleman, as I was getting onto the bus, the guard said, do you want to be, I forgot the word he used, but it was do you want to be the super for the bus ride? I'm like, what does that mean? He goes, well, that means I'll take your shackles off, but you have to give water to all the girls when they want it on the 5-hour bus ride. I was like, yes? So they took my shackles off. But I was sharing last night, and I'll share now that really unpleasant story. One of the women that was transported with us was this really elderly woman. She had to have been close to 80, 75, 80. And there was a bathroom on the bus. But you're 75 years old, 80 years old, and she was very weak, I remember. And they didn't feed us well, right? So she probably just didn't have the sustenance and the energy. And so she went to use the bathroom at some point in the night and didn't quite aim properly. And so there's a moving bus. So all of that was up and down the aisle. It was not pleasant. So nobody else wanted to walk around at that point, except I had to. So thankfully I had government-issued shoes that then got thrown in the garbage.
There's a second chat question which says, what would you have done when the FBI came knocking, knowing what you know now?
Okay, when the FBI knocks on your door, this is what you do. Can I please have your card, and I'll call you back with an attorney. And then talk to your attorney, and I would have gone through, this is what I think they're going to talk to me about. Because, the attorney is going to ask you the questions that you don't want to ask yourself and prod more than you want to prod about what happened. I remember I was rationalizing and justifying and making assumptions, and I had all this stuff going on in my head that to a third party, they can look in and say, you sure that's what you should have been doing? Yes?
Because you're an attorney, is that the reason why you became their target?
Mm.
And once you were their target, did they pursue these other individuals?
Mm.
And how did you feel about that as well?
Yeah. So I do believe that because I was an attorney, I was considered a leader of this conspiracy, even though I wasn't. So I got higher points for that in the sentencing. And I do know that Joe and I have talked about it. So I know that that's one of the reasons why he targeted me. Because there's a higher expectation for attorneys, right? But the other people that were indicted with me I had said that the client didn't get indicted, but the client's right-hand guy, one of the guys that I had met with on that first day and who was deep in it every day, he did get indicted with me, and he is the person that I then testified against at trial. So I was the government's main witness. This is before I got sentenced, against him. So he was indicted, and then there was a real estate broker and a mortgage broker from Wells Fargo, and a real estate broker. And their complaint, I think, had 6 transactions attached to it. Mine had 24. Theirs had 6, so it was a lot less of the numbers were less for them. They both had already pled. So now at trial, this is interesting. The client's right-hand guy, right? I'm the government's main witness. I'm at trial. His entire defense was what? Can you guess?
Advice of counsel.
His entire defense, as Tim said, was advice of counsel. This was Rashmi's idea. She went to Columbia Law School. She was the smart one, right? So I had to debunk all of that on the stand. And I was being crossed for like 18 hours. Okay, it was insane, like over 3 days. And because it was a very document-heavy case. And, I had to show through exhibits and emails and testimony that they had been doing the same thing prior to me even entering the picture, to show that it was not my advice that created these transactions. But yeah, that was their main goal. One of the things that I'll share, hopefully I don't offend anybody, is I talk a lot about attributing trust to people. So we attribute trust to people because they're maybe went to a better school than us, what we think, have a higher position than us, make more money than us, are older than us, have been doing it longer than us, right? Are an uncle or whatever, a father. But sometimes we attribute trust for the wrong reasons. And the reason I say this is I did with this client. This client was an extremely orthodox religious person, yarmulke and everything, right? I assumed he would never do anything wrong. He's a super religious guy. It's one of the reasons I know that I didn't do my due diligence, because I just assumed that he would never do anything wrong. But it's obviously really silly, because religion and legal and ethics just don't always go hand in hand. Yes? Do I still talk to anybody in prison? So I had a prison mom, okay? So where my housing unit, the way the housing at the camp, I'm going to talk about the camp mostly because that's where I spent most of I was there 5 months. By the way, I want to say something. There are women that are in prison for years, right? There were women that were there for 20-some years. So I don't ever want to overestimate what happened to me. 1 day is too long to be away from your children, right? To lose your freedom. But compared to what other women had to go through, I realized I was really lucky and blessed. So I want to start with that. So where I was the housing unit. There was 2 buildings, kind of, how do I do it? Like this, upstairs, downstairs and upstairs. And I was upstairs in this building. And so I was in one of the cubes. And has anybody seen Orange is the New Black? So you know how there's aisles and there's cubes on either side, right? So it's kind of similar to that, except in Orange is the New Black, they have 2 beds next to each other on the floor, and my cube was a bunk bed. So I had the top bunk, and then we had those lockers and the chairs, whatever. So I had this top bunk, and down the hall from me, maybe 6 cubes down, was this woman that eventually I realized happened to know my ex-husband through family. Now, I'll tell you why she was in prison, because this is a really sad story. She was in prison because she was the office manager for a law firm, also a real estate law firm, and the managing partner and his wife, who was also the attorney, stole, I want to say a lot of money from their escrow account. I think it was $1 million from their escrow account, and fled to Venezuela. And since she was the office manager and she used to sign off on things, they couldn't get the managing partner and his wife, so they got her for knowing. And she went away for 7 years, guys, 7. The justice system is really messed up in many ways. So anyways, she ended up becoming like my mom. So she would leave me little notes on my locker that's with a quote with "Love, Mom," and It's actually a great story because she came out. I got out before her because I got out early, right? She came out. I had already, she of course had all my contact information. We shared information when I left, and I gave her my info. I gave her my parents' name. Both my parents were lawyers. She reached out to my dad without me even knowing. She gets out, she reaches out to my dad and says, are you looking for an assistant? Since 2016, April, she has worked for my dad. And she does it virtually. Sometimes she comes, to the house. And so when she was coming to the house, my parents both work from home. And I would walk into my parents' house and I'd be like, hi, Mom. Hi, Mom. And then there's another, so my bunkie, her name was Michelle. And Michelle also, I keep in touch with. She lives near Tampa, and so we text, and I've seen her a few times. If I have a speaking engagement near Tampa, she'll come and see me, or in Orlando, she'll come and see me. And then there's one other woman who was like my sister in prison, and she, her name is Shakira, and she works nearby, so we try to see each other whenever we can. But you remember, when you get out of prison, when you're on supervised release, you can't communicate with others that have either been in prison or before. So there's even after you get out of prison, there's a period of time before you can communicate with somebody else who's been in prison. So I had to wait 3 years. I had to get special permission to be able to communicate with Patricia, my prison mom, because she was working in the house.
I have a question.
Okay.
You talk about your transformation, forgiving yourself, forgiving others. At what point did that happen? Was it while you were in prison? Afterwards?
So I had a spiritual transformation going through this, and around the time that I decided to plead guilty, which was August, September 2014, after that meeting with David, my grandmother in India had called me and said, you need to do this. There's in Hindi, it's called Hanuman Chalisa, which is a prayer to Hanuman, which is the warrior god. So she said, you need to do Hanuman Chalisa every day, and you need to just pray. So as I began to do this, I was literally searching. So I also listened to a Joel Osteen sermon every single day because he preaches hope, and whether you like him or not, or Christian or not, I just liked the stories, and I liked how he spoke of hope. So literally I kept a list of every Joel Osteen sermon I had listened to, and I was it was like I had to soak it up, right? And I would do this on a walk every day. And so between these two things and then spending time with my friends and family, I got to a place where I really said to myself, I don't know why this is happening to me, but I trust that it's for my good. And that was enough for me. So when I walked into prison, I had a very positive attitude about going into it. I really began to say, okay, prison is my forced ashram time. That's really how I saw it. I was like, the worst thing about this is that I'm away from my children, which is, of course, that was the only thing I really was worried about. And of course, yes, I lost all my money and all of this, but I knew that I had this forced time away to completely reinvent my life. And I read a lot when I was in prison. Every week, I still read a lot, but I read a lot. I wrote a lot. I began to read the Bible and the Gita. And, I just did things that I think continue to help me grow and develop and become better as a human. And so I would say that forgiveness came before I went into prison and that spiritual awakening, which I think was really positive for me, so that the time that I was there, I wasn't, there's so many women in prison that are so bitter and so negative and sleep their day away and are fighting with others because they're so angry, and they lie to their children, they don't tell their children where they're at, all of that. There's no level of integrity, and I did not want to live in that space. So.
All right. Well, thank you. If there are no more questions, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much.